August 19, 1944. Wehrmacht Headquarters, East Prussia. Generaloberst Alfred Jodl reviewed the latest intelligence reports from the collapsing Western Front. His staff had crunched the numbers on the Allied supply lines, which now stretched over 400 miles from the Normandy beaches to the spearheading Third Army of General George S. Patton. The Americans have outrun their logistics, the analysis concluded. Patton will halt within days, perhaps hours. No army can sustain such advanced speeds without fuel. From his position at Hitler's Wolf's Lair headquarters, Jodl analyzed what every German general understood from brutal experience. An armored division consumed 150,000 gallons of fuel daily when advancing. The Americans were now 400 miles from their supply depots. The calculation was inescapable. Patton's Third Army would grind to a halt, giving the Wehrmacht precious time to regroup at the Seine River, perhaps even hold the line until winter. This confidence was rooted in decades of German military doctrine. The Wehrmacht had pioneered blitzkrieg and revolutionized combined arms warfare. They understood intimately the tyranny of supply lines. Their own legendary campaigns had repeatedly stalled when logistics failed to keep pace with tactical success. In Russia, the German advance had foundered not initially from Soviet resistance, but from the simple inability to supply forces across the vast distances. German trucks broke down on primitive roads, and horse-drawn wagons, still comprising 80% of German military transport, couldn't match the speed of panzer spearheads. General der Panzertruppe Heinrich Freiherr von Luttwitz, who would command the 47th Panzer Corps from September 1944, had written in July, "The Americans face the same logistical impossibility we faced in Russia. Their mechanical advantage becomes a disadvantage. Machines require fuel, ammunition, parts. They have advanced 400 miles in 30 days. History teaches us what comes next." Paralysis. German intelligence meticulously tracked American consumption rates. A single Sherman tank burned half a mile per gallon on roads, and far worse, cross-country. An infantry division required 700 tons of supplies daily. An armored division needed 1,000 tons. Patton commanded 12 divisions, advancing on a 60-mile front. The mathematics seemed irrefutable. 12,000 tons daily, transported 400 miles from the beaches over damaged roads through a transportation network the Germans had systematically destroyed during their retreat. Generalmajor Siegfried Westphal, who would become Chief of Staff to Field Marshal von Rundstedt in September, calculated on August 20th. Even if the Americans possessed unlimited trucks, which they don't, and perfect roads, which they don't, and no mechanical failures, which is impossible, they still couldn't sustain Patton's advance more than another 48 hours. Physical laws cannot be violated, not even by American industry. The German High Command was certain. They had calculated the problem with Prussian precision. The Americans were bold, even reckless, but they were not magicians. The laws of physics and logistics would soon enforce their own brutal justice. And Patton's Blitz would end not with a bang, but with an empty gas tank. What Jodl and every German general didn't know was that 125 miles away, the solution to their inescapable calculation was already rolling eastward. An endless convoy of 5,958 trucks was on the move, their headlights blazing in defiance of all military doctrine, carrying 12,500 tons of supplies every 24 hours. The Red Ball Express, a logistics operation so audacious that German military science had never conceived it possible, was about to shatter every assumption they held about modern warfare. While German generals confidently predicted his paralysis, General George S. Patton was fuming. His Third Army was indeed gasping for fuel and supplies, its advance threatened not by German resistance, but by logistical collapse. Traditional methods, Rail transport, scheduled convoys, depot-to-depot distribution had buckled under the unprecedented speed of his advance. At 2 p.m. on August 25, 1944, in a requisitioned French chateau near Le Mans, Lieutenant Colonel Lauren A. Ayers of the Motor Transport Service faced a room full of skeptical officers. The math they presented was stark and undeniable. Patton's army was consuming supplies faster than any force in history. "Gentlemen," Ayers announced, cutting through the pessimism, "we're going to create a one-way highway from Cherbourg and the beaches to the front lines. Every vehicle will run 20 hours out of 24, no stopping except for gas and emergencies. We'll move 12,500 tons daily minimum." The name came from railway terminology. A red ball freight was an express shipment that took priority over everything else. The Red Ball Express would operate on the same principle: absolute priority, no delays, no exceptions. Its technical specifications defied every rule in the military logistics manual. 2 parallel highways, one for loaded trucks going forward, one for empties returning. 24/7 operations. Headlights were to be kept on, blazing, abandoning all blackout discipline. No stop policy. Halting was forbidden except for fuel or mechanical failure. Relentless tempo. 5-minute convoy intervals, maintaining a 35-mile-per-hour average speed. Mobile maintenance. Repair units every 50 miles. Strict enforcement. MP checkpoints removed any vehicle traveling below 25 miles per hour. Colonel Charles O. Thrasher, commanding the advanced section of the communications zone, reviewed the projected numbers. "We need 140 truck companies, 5,958 vehicles minimum, operating at 90% availability. That's impossible by any logistics textbook ever written." Yet, within 36 hours, the impossible was operational. On August 26, 1944, drivers from the 3916th Quartermaster Truck Company climbed into their GMC CCKW 2.5-ton trucks, nicknamed the Deuce and a Half, loaded with 105mm artillery shells bound for Patton's guns at Melun, 300 miles east. The great convoy began to roll. The demographic composition of this force would have stunned German racial theorists. Of the 23,000 drivers who would eventually operate the route, approximately 75% were African American soldiers serving in a still segregated army. These men, who faced discrimination and were denied equal rights back home, were now the lifeline for the most celebrated white general's army. They developed their own culture and rules within hours, painting slogans like "Patton's Blood Bank" and "Detroit to Berlin Express" on their trucks. Slower vehicles immediately pulled over. Any truck below 20 miles per hour was considered a roadblock. Mechanical failures were simply pushed into ditches to keep the river of supply flowing. By August 28th, German reconnaissance units began reporting something unprecedented. A unit from Aufklärungsgruppe 116 radioed from positions overlooking the main route. Continuous vehicle column, headlights visible for 20 kilometers, no spacing, no blackout discipline. Estimate 1,000 vehicles per hour. Americans have abandoned all military precaution. This chaotic, roaring, blazingly bright river of steel and supplies was everything German doctrine taught not to do. It invited air attack and presented a perfect artillery target. Yet the Americans seemed unconcerned. They were not fighting with the rule book of the past. They were writing a new one with every mile they drove. The German general's laughter was about to be drowned out by the relentless roar of 6,000 engines. The German High Command initially dismissed the first reports as fantasy or propaganda. But by August 30th, the evidence was undeniable. General der Panzertruppe Edgar Feuchtinger, commanding the 21st Panzer Division, personally observed the Red Ball Express from a concealed position. His report to Army Group B headquarters reflected a growing sense of alarm and disbelief. "The enemy operates a supply system beyond our comprehension," he wrote. "Vehicles pass at 30-second intervals, day and night, without pause. They don't hide, don't disperse, don't follow any rules we understand. It's not military science. It's mass production applied to warfare." What the German military minds struggled to grasp was that American logistics operated on entirely different principles. Where German doctrine emphasized concealment and conservation, the Americans relied on overwhelming volume and brutal redundancy. Where Germans followed strict, centralized procedures, the Americans improvised continuously, empowering junior officers and even sergeants to make critical decisions on the spot. The numbers achieved by the Red Ball Express defied every German calculation of what was logistically possible. In its first week of operation, from August 25th to 31st, it delivered 89,939 tons of supplies, a daily average of 12,848 tons. The convoys covered a round-trip distance of 686 miles, with 5,958 trucks making an average of 1.5 trips per day. The operation itself consumed 300,000 gallons of fuel daily, a figure that dwarfed the entire allocation for many German panzer divisions. German logistics specialists who captured these numbers from American documents dismissed them as propaganda. But the numbers were real, and they were accelerating. By September 5th, the Red Ball Express had established an impossible rhythm. Convoys departed every 5 minutes from the western terminus. The average convoy consisted of 67 vehicles, each carrying a standard 5 tons, often overloaded to 7. They covered the 350-mile one-way trip in an average of 14 hours, with a blistering 2-hour turnaround time at each end. At any given moment, 5,000 trucks were in constant motion. The system generated innovations hourly. When trucks broke down, approximately 1,800 daily, mobile maintenance units performed 15-minute triage. If they couldn't fix it, the vehicle was pushed off the road. Parts were cannibalized from wrecks. Engines were swapped in 45 minutes using mobile cranes. When the main route became congested, drivers created alternate paths, commandeered French buses, and even pressed captured German vehicles into service, painting them olive drab. The most stunning revelation for German observers was the American fuel management. The Red Ball consumed over 300,000 gallons of gasoline daily just for its own operations. Yet it never ran short. The Americans had created a parallel marvel, Operation Pluto, pipeline under the ocean, which was already laying fuel pipelines across the English Channel. Forward fuel dumps were established every 25 miles along the route, with tanker trucks running their own parallel convoy system. General der Panzertruppe Heinrich Eberbach, observing the situation, noted with despair, "The Americans have fuel dumps larger than our entire strategic reserves. They burn more gasoline moving gasoline than we allocate to entire panzer divisions. This isn't war as we understand it. It's industrial overflow." This industrial overflow directly translated into battlefield results. German doctrine calculated that an armored division could sustain a 20 to 30-mile advance daily under optimal conditions. Patton's divisions, fed by the Red Ball Express, averaged 40 to 60 miles daily for weeks. On September 1st, the 4th Armored Division advanced 35 miles in the morning, halted for a Red Ball resupply at noon, and advanced another 32 miles in the afternoon, a 67-mile single-day advance that shattered German defensive planning. In East Prussia, Generaloberst Heinz Guderian, the father of German armored warfare, reviewed the reports and initially refused to believe them. No armored force can advance 60 miles daily for a week. Mechanical failures alone prevent it. This is propaganda or misidentification. But intercepted American radio traffic, broadcast openly without code, confirmed it. The Americans were now so confident in their ability to outsupply and outrun any German response that they felt no need for secrecy. The Wehrmacht's finest military minds were being defeated not by a superior tactical genius, but by a superior system of supply. A system they still could not fully comprehend. Behind the staggering statistics of the Red Ball Express was a human story that German intelligence completely failed to anticipate. The relentless 24/7 operation was powered by 23,000 drivers, the vast majority of whom were African-American soldiers serving in a segregated army. These men, who faced discrimination and were denied basic rights back home, became the indispensable engine of Patton's advance. They drove the iconic GMC CCKW 2.5-ton trucks, the Deuce and a Half, which represented American industrial prowess. General Motors had produced over 500,000 of these robust all-wheel drive vehicles by war's end. More trucks than the entire German military possessed of all types combined. But it was the drivers who turned this industrial potential into a battlefield reality. The conditions were brutal. Drivers operated for 72 hours straight, fueled by caffeine and benzodrine stimulants to fight off exhaustion. They hallucinated from fatigue, their hands permanently glued to the vibrating steering wheels. The accident rate was horrific. 300 drivers would be killed during the Red Ball's operation from collisions, overturned trucks, and mechanical fires. Yet, morale remained extraordinarily high. For these African-American soldiers, the Red Ball Express was more than a logistics route. It was a front in a war against two forms of racism: the Nazi ideology they faced overseas and the institutional discrimination they endured at home. They understood the profound irony of their situation. They were proving Hitler's theories of racial inferiority categorically wrong with every mile they drove and every ton they delivered. Corporal John L. Houston drove continuously for 48 hours, delivering ammunition to the 2nd Armored Division at Cambrai, falling asleep at the wheel 3 times but continuing after being revived by other drivers. Private Booker T. Washington's truck caught fire from overheated brakes while carrying medical supplies. Instead of abandoning it as procedure required, he drove the burning vehicle 2 miles to a field hospital, jumping out only as the flames reached the cab. The supplies he saved were used to treat wounded soldiers from both armies. These stories of individual initiative and sacrifice revealed a military culture that baffled German observers. In the Wehrmacht, such actions would have required orders from a high-ranking officer. In the U.S. Army, sergeants and corporals made decisions on the fly, prioritizing the mission over rigid regulatory compliance. The psychological impact on both the German forces and the French civilians was immediate and profound. Wehrmacht soldiers could hear the endless rumble of American trucks all night, a constant auditory reminder of an enemy with seemingly infinite resources. They fought with 3 rounds per rifle, while the convoys they heard carried millions. The sound itself became a weapon of psychological warfare. For the French civilians who had endured years of German occupation and scarcity, the sight of the Red Ball Express was a revelation. The drivers, particularly the African Americans, often shared their rations with starving families despite regulations. They gave children chocolate, cigarettes, and soap. The contrast with the strict rationing German occupation was stark. The Americans gave away casually what the Germans had hoarded ruthlessly. German intelligence reports noted the devastating propaganda impact. French civilians now believe American victory inevitable. They cite the truck convoys as proof. Resistance activity has increased 400% along Red Ball routes. The success of these predominantly black drivers created cognitive dissonance for the German racial theorists and, more importantly, forced a reckoning within the U.S. military itself. General Eisenhower, visiting the operations in September 1944, witnessed the contradiction firsthand. His aide, Captain Harry Butcher, recorded the moment. The general stood watching colored drivers who'd been at it for 20 hours straight. He said, "These men are winning the war as surely as any infantry. We need to reconsider many things." The Red Ball Express was their combat, and they were winning it decisively. They were not just delivering supplies, they were delivering a powerful argument for their own equality, driving a stake into the heart of Nazi ideology and challenging the very foundations of segregation in the American armed forces. By early September 1944, the Red Ball Express faced its ultimate test. Patton's Third Army had advanced so far and so fast that even this monumental supply line was straining. The round trip now exceeded 700 miles. Drivers were collapsing at the wheel, and vehicles were disintegrating from the relentless pace. German intelligence detected the strain. General der Panzertruppe Hasso von Manteuffel reported on September 8th. American supply lines show signs of collapse. Convoy intervals have increased from 5 to 15 minutes. Vehicle speed has decreased. This is our opportunity. It was the moment German generals had predicted, the logistical culmination point. But American adaptability once again shocked them. Within 72 hours, the Red Ball Express underwent a massive reorganization. Engineers created intermediate transfer points, cutting individual driver runs to a more manageable 350 miles. They implemented strict driver rotation systems, established forward maintenance bases, and doubled the number of assigned vehicles. By September 12th, against all German expectations, tonnage delivery had not only stabilized, it had increased. The system hadn't broken. It had evolved and grown stronger. This resilience was backed by another logistics miracle Germans deemed impossible: large-scale aerial supply. C-47 transport aircraft began swarming the skies, delivering critical supplies directly to forward units. On September 16th, Wehrmacht observers counted 900 transport flights in a single day, delivering 2,700 tons by air. The Luftwaffe at its peak had managed 300 tons daily to Stalingrad, and considered that a maximum effort. The Americans used transport aircraft like trucks, assuming losses and overwhelming them with numbers. The final, devastating blow to German military pride came from the cold, hard statistics of the Red Ball Express. Over its 82 days of operation, it delivered 412,193 tons of supplies. Its trucks covered 122 million ton miles. It employed on average nearly 6,000 vehicles daily, peaking at 7,000. All operated by 23,000 drivers. It consumed 57 million gallons of fuel and wore out 180,000 tires. The operation destroyed over 5,000 trucks through sheer attrition, yet the flow never stopped. New trucks arrived weekly from American factories. German officers, studying these figures in captivity, made a devastating admission. They had calculated American logistics based on European precedent, multiplying their own best performance by 3 and assuming that was the American maximum. They had been wrong by a factor of 10. The psychological impact was catastrophic for the Wehrmacht. Field Marshal Walter Model, one of Germany's most competent commanders, wrote in his final report, "We were not defeated by American tanks or planes primarily. We were defeated by American trucks." Another captured officer, General der Infanterie Friedrich Schulz, summarized the existential shock. The Red Ball Express represents warfare we never imagined. Americans created a temporary civilization. We built permanent infrastructure over years. They created superior temporary systems in days. The most insightful analysis came from General Heinz Guderian, the father of the Blitzkrieg. We invented Blitzkrieg but never solved its fundamental limitation, logistics. Americans solved it through industrial excess we deemed impossible. The Red Ball Express was not a supply line, but a flowing river of material that drowned our forces. The German generals who had laughed at American logistics in August were forced to sign surrender documents in May 1945. Defeated in large part by 23,000 truck drivers who revolutionized warfare at 35 miles per hour. They finally understood the hardest lesson of modern warfare. Amateurs talk tactics, but professionals talk logistics. The Red Ball Express had proven, irrevocably, that in the industrial age, the side with the most trucks beats the side with the best tactics. The Red Ball Express was officially discontinued on November 16, 1944, as advancing railroad lines finally caught up with the front. But its impact echoed far beyond the battlefields of France, leaving an indelible mark on military doctrine, American society, and the very landscape of the nation. The Military Revolution. The operation fundamentally rewrote the rules of modern warfare. The U.S. Army formally adopted the principles of volume over efficiency and decentralized execution. The chaos that had baffled German officers became standard procedure, empowering junior officers and NCOs to make critical decisions without waiting for orders from high command. The success of the Red Ball validated a new kind of warfare where industrial capacity and logistical prowess were more decisive than tactical genius. As one Pentagon analysis later concluded, the Red Ball Express proved that logistics isn't a supporting function, it is the main effort. The Trucking Revolution. When the war ended, thousands of Red Ball veterans returned home with unique experience, operating the largest transportation network in history. These men didn't just return to their old lives, they built a new America. Veterans like James "Jimmy" C. Weldon, who had driven 15,000 miles for the Red Ball, founded the Yellow Freight Trucking Company. Others started Roadway Express, Consolidated Freightways, and dozens of regional carriers. They applied the military principles they had mastered in France, 24/7 operations, relay systems, and hub-and-spoke distribution, to civilian commerce. The relentless, high-volume approach of the Red Ball Express became the blueprint for the American trucking industry, which would soon dominate the nation's freight system. The Social Revolution. The success of the predominantly African-American Red Ball drivers created irreversible momentum for civil rights. The contradiction between their vital contribution to victory and their second-class status became impossible to ignore. In 1948, largely due to the proven performance of units like the Red Ball drivers, President Harry S. Truman signed Executive Order 9981, desegregating the U.S. Armed Forces. The men who had fought racism with their truck keys in Europe came home to continue that fight, many becoming leaders in the growing civil rights movement. As veteran driver Corporal William H. Thompson said at a 1963 rally, "We proved we could deliver democracy in Europe. Now we're here to collect what we're owed at home." The Infrastructure Revolution. The lessons of the Red Ball Express directly influenced the creation of the interstate highway system. When President Eisenhower signed the Federal Aid Highway Act of 1956, he explicitly referenced his wartime experience. "The old convoy had started me thinking about good two-lane highways," he wrote in his memoir. "This was one of the things that I felt deeply about, and I made a personal and absolute decision to see that the nation would benefit by it." The interstates, with their limited access, high speeds, and redundancy, were essentially a permanent civilian version of the Red Ball route. The final accounting. The operation cost approximately $100 million in 1944 dollars, a figure German staff officers found incomprehensible. Yet the War Department calculated that each day of shortened conflict saved the nation $250 million. The Red Ball Express, by enabling the rapid liberation of France and preventing German consolidation, had shortened the war in Europe by an estimated 6 months. It had paid for itself many times over. In 1994, on the 50th anniversary of D-Day, the United States Postal Service issued a commemorative stamp honoring the Red Ball Express. At the ceremony, surviving veterans, now in their 70s and 80s, stood proudly as their contribution was finally recognized on a national scale. The ultimate tribute came from General S. Patton himself, who wrote in his memoirs, "The truck drivers of the Red Ball Express deserved as much credit for the defeat of Germany as any combat unit. They were black soldiers mostly, segregated, discriminated against, denied recognition. But they won the war as surely as any rifleman. History must record this truth." The German generals had laughed at American logistics in August 1944. But by May 1945, they understood that the Red Ball Express represented something entirely new in warfare. The moment when industrial democracy mobilized its full potential, when trucks became more important than tanks, and when 23,000 determined drivers proved that the nation that can deliver the most supplies, the fastest, the farthest, will ultimately deliver victory. The story of the Red Ball Express did not end with the stamp ceremony or the veterans' memoirs. Its legacy continues to echo through military academies, corporate boardrooms, and the global understanding of power in the modern age. The new arithmetic of power. The Red Ball Express taught the world a new arithmetic. Victory was no longer calculated solely in divisions and firepower, but in ton-miles and daily delivery rates. Nations began to understand that a country's true military strength was not just its standing army, but its latent logistical capacity, its truck factories, its oil refineries, its number of qualified drivers. The Pentagon's post-war planning shifted dramatically to emphasize strategic mobility and sea-lift-airlift capacity, concepts directly born from the lesson that the ability to project and sustain power was as important as the power itself. The corporate playbook. The principles of the Red Ball Express, speed over perfection, redundancy over lean efficiency, decentralized decision-making, became the unexpected playbook for the late 20th century corporate revolution. Companies like Walmart and Amazon would build their empires on a similar model: vast, highly responsive distribution networks that prioritized getting goods to the customer above all else, even if it meant some waste and chaos in the system. The just-in-time delivery of the late 1900s had its philosophical roots in the always-moving convoys of 1944. The monument in sound and memory. Perhaps the most poignant legacy is intangible. In the small towns and villages of Normandy and Brittany, the memory of the never-ending convoy passed into local legend. Elderly residents who were children in 1944 still recall the ground vibrating, the constant roar of engines, and the strange sight of headlights piercing the night sky, a beacon of hope after years of blackout and fear. The sound of those 6,000 trucks became and remains a monument in itself. The final unanswered question. The story circles back to that lost German officer standing by a Belgian road who asked his captors the question that still resonates. We prepared for everything. Your tanks, your planes, your ships. We never prepared for your trucks. How do you defeat an enemy who has more trucks than you have soldiers? The answer, proven on the highways of France and repeated in conflict since, is that you cannot. The Red Ball Express was the moment the world saw for the first time the full, terrifying, and liberating potential of industrial democracy unleashed. It was not a perfectly orchestrated symphony of war, but a roaring, chaotic, and unstoppable jazz improvisation of men, machines, and determination. The German generals stopped laughing when they understood this truth. But by then, the sound of their silence was drowned out by the roar of the 2.5 trucks, still rolling east, carrying not just fuel and ammunition, but the future itself at 35 miles per hour.